7 weeks after Alistair Vane seized Clara Whitmore's home, the powerful banker would stand before a judge and swear that opening one pipe beneath Bellweather baths could destroy the town's prosperity. But on the morning Clara received the bathhouse, everyone called it worthless. Its roof leaked, its marble pools were filled with rubble, and its water supply had supposedly been disconnected for 12 years. Clara accepted the property only because challenging her father's disputed debt would have left her homeless. Then her training in pipe surveying revealed something the bank's inspectors had missed or deliberately ignored. Behind a bricked arch, a copper line remained cold, pressurized, and perfectly clear. Before Clara could trace where it led, Vane ordered the building demolished and warned every workman in Bellweather not to help her. The deed was delivered at 9 on a colorless March morning, while rain ticked against the parlor window of the house in Chapel Row that had belonged to Clara's parents for 26 years. Mr. Everett Shaw, the bank's solicitor, laid the folded vellum beside a notice requiring her to vacate by noon. "The exchange extinguishes the remainder of your father's obligation," he said. His voice held the careful gentleness of a man who preferred his cruelties notarized. "Bellweather Baths passes to you with its fixtures, conduits, easements, and appurtenances. In return, Vane and County Bank takes possession here without further proceedings." Clara read both documents twice. The debt had begun as £380 charged to her father, Robert Whitmore, after a repair to the town's eastern water main. He had maintained that the water board ordered the work and that the board's reserve fund owed the contractors. Alistair Vane, who chaired both the bank and the water board, produced a private guarantee bearing Robert's signature. Robert called the last paragraph an addition. He died before he could prove it. Now the accumulated interest exceeded the value of the house. "The baths were assessed at £21, Clara said. "This house is worth nearly 500. The bank could sell neither the baths nor the land beneath them. Demolition will cost more than the stone will fetch." "Then it is not an exchange. It is mercy." Shaw did not meet her eyes. Through the window, Clara saw 2 bank porters waiting by a covered wagon. Vane had sent them before she answered, because he knew her answer. If she refused, the bank would take the house and continue pursuing the debt. If she accepted, its covenant ended. Clara signed. She carried away 2 valises, her father's survey case, and the brass key to a building no one had entered lawfully in years. The neighbors watched behind curtains as the bank porters removed the blue china her mother had painted with apple blossoms. Clara did not cry until she reached the end of the row, and even then, she allowed herself only the distance between 2 gas lamps. Bellweather Baths stood at the narrowest point of the valley, between the river and the road to Bracken Hill. It had once been a handsome Italianate building of pale limestone, built when municipal bathing was spoken of with the fervor usually reserved for churches. 12 arched windows faced the road. 11 had been boarded. Above the 12th, a fractured stone woman poured an empty urn. Someone had chalked "Worthless Palace" across the front doors. Inside, damp had softened the plaster into scales. Rain fell through 3 breaks in the roof and struck the floor with the regularity of clocks. The men's plunge pool was filled with broken benches, brick, and 2 rusted bedsteads. In the women's bath, nettles rose through a crack in the tile. Clara found a fox's track on the superintendent's desk and a bank inspection report in a drawer. "Disconnected from Harker Supply," it declared. "All internal pipework dry. No recoverable machinery. Inspector T. Bale." Clara took out her father's folding rule. Robert Whitmore had taught her to survey pipes because, as he said, water had no regard for which professions a woman was permitted to enter. It obeyed head, resistance, and gravity. At 16, she could calculate the loss of pressure along a cast iron main. At 20, she could detect a hidden leak by listening through an ash rod. Men who refused her reports often repeated her conclusions as their own, but the figures remained true. The bathhouse plan showed 2 6-inch supply lines entering from the north, both marked severed. Yet a row of tiles along the eastern basement wall showed less salt bloom than those beside it. Damp rose there in a clean vertical band. Clara pressed the back of her fingers to the plaster. It was colder than the surrounding wall. She cleared fallen lath and found an arch filled with brick, unlike any elsewhere in the building. The old walls had lime mortar flecked with charcoal. This mortar was gray Portland cement, hard and recent. Someone had bricked the opening long after the baths were built. Her father's cold chisel was still in the survey case. The first brick took 40 minutes. The second came more easily. Behind them lay a service passage no wider than her shoulders. A copper pipe ran along its wall, green at the joints but sound. Condensation silvered its underside. Clara stared at it. A dry pipe could be cold in March. It could not sweat steadily. In a closed passage, she put her ear to it. Beneath the murmur of the river, she heard a low, taut singing. At the nearest union, she loosened a test screw by one turn. A needle of clear water struck the opposite wall. She tightened it at once, then tasted the drop from her glove. It carried none of the iron bitterness of the town mains. This was upland water. Soft and faintly peaty, the pipe was alive. Footsteps sounded in the basement. Clara backed from the passage, gripping the chisel. Alistair Vane descended with Everett Shaw and a constable. Vane was 58, silver-haired, erect, and dressed as though weather were an inconvenience purchased by poorer men. His gaze went from the fallen bricks to the wet mark on the wall. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you have been an owner for less than 2 hours, and already you are damaging your property. Your inspector certified these pipes dry. Then any moisture is seepage. Seepage does not hold pressure." For a moment, surprise disturbed the smoothness of his face. Then he smiled. "Your father also found mysteries wherever an unpaid account should have been." Clara's hand tightened around the chisel. Vane gave Shaw a sheet of paper. It was a notice from the borough surveyor declaring the baths dangerous and requiring demolition within 10 days. The date at the top was the previous morning, before Clara owned the building. "You may retain any salvage after the contractor's expenses," Vane said. "Mr. Crowell has offered to clear the site as a public service." Benedict Crowell's dye and paper mill stood beyond Bracken Hill. Its new chimney had risen all winter, financed by Vane and County Bank. "You cannot order demolition on property you no longer own. The borough can abate a danger. No reputable man in Bellweather will risk his livelihood disputing the borough." By noon, Clara learned what he meant. The Slater brothers refused to shore the roof. The mason returned her deposit without entering the building. At the timber yard, the clerk whispered that the bank had called in one customer's note that morning and promised to review the credit of anyone employed at the baths. Even men who disliked Vane had children, rent, and loans. At dusk, Clara sat on the edge of the empty women's pool and examined the bank's plan by lantern light. The copper line did not appear. Where the service passage should have been, the draftsman had drawn a boiler flue. That flue never existed. The voice came from the doorway. A broad woman of about 50 stood there, carrying a basket covered with sacking. Her skirt was mud-stained to the knee, and her gray-streaked hair had escaped its pins. "If you are another borough inspector, you have chosen a strange disguise," Clara said. "Edith Harrow. I grow onions, beans, and cabbages on 3 acres of the common fields, or I did before the ground began drying." She uncovered the basket. Inside were bread, cheese, 2 onions no larger than walnuts, and a stone object wrapped in cloth. "Your father told me that if the baths ever changed hands, I was to give this to the new owner, provided the owner opened that wall." The stone object was a wedge-shaped marker, its face carved with a simple fraction, 3/12. Beneath it was the letter Q. "Where did this come from?" "The edge of my irrigation ditch. There were 6 when I was a girl. The bank's men removed 5 during the new mill works. Your father asked me to hide the last." Clara set the marker against the plan. What did he believe it marked? "Our share," Edith told her that the common fields had once been famous for early greens, warm south-facing soil, and a network of stone-lined ditches supplied Bellwether's market through spring. 12 years earlier, when the baths closed, the upper ditches began to run only after storms. Each year brought less water. Tenant growers surrendered their strips. Crowell's agents bought several for storage sheds. Edith's lower field survived because of a shallow well, but the well had fallen by 3 feet since the new mill began testing its engines. "The water board says the river has changed," Edith said. "Rivers are useful liars. They cannot testify. My father could. That is why they ruined him." Clara studied the carved Q. The fraction was not decorative. In pipe records, such marks designated proportional delivery. 3/12. 1/4 was too large for a single farm and plausible for an entire tract. The next morning she climbed Bracken Hill with a leveling staff, an aneroid barometer, and her father's notes. The copper pipe emerged nowhere she could see. Above the bathhouse, a line of old hawthorns traced an improbable curve across the slope. Beneath them, a buried main could climb nearly 30 feet before passing over the shoulder of the hill. Water could not climb from the baths under its own local gravity. But Harker Reservoir stood on the moor 212 feet above the valley. If a sealed main descended from that reservoir to the baths, the pressure from the higher source could force it uphill again, provided the crest remained below the reservoir surface. An inverted siphon. The rise would look impossible only to someone who began measuring at the valley floor. At the hill crest, Clara found a cast-iron air valve under a broken trough. It vibrated faintly. Beyond it, the ground fell toward Crowell's mill. The copper line beneath the baths did not supply the baths alone. It lay on a pressurized route between Harker Reservoir and the industrial quarter. The borough archive denied her water board minutes on Vane's instruction, and the parish sent her to the county record room. Its quarter sessions index contained no Bellweather water compact, Bellweather baths, or Harker Reservoir. Near closing, after 6 hours among drainage and pasture entries, Clara found a single line: Quill, Harriet Improvement of Common Pasture and Public Cleanliness, Bellweather. Deposited Plan and Award, 1,841. The packet itself was missing. The name on the index matched the Q on Edith's stone. That night, 2 men entered the bathhouse and began rebuilding the wall. Clara struck the iron handrail with her chisel until the tiled chambers rang like a fire bell. They fled, leaving cement, blue dye on the stair, and a sledgehammer branded Crowell Mill. At the next water board meeting, Vane called them vagrants, and the thick-necked Benedict Crowell claimed his mill sold discarded tools by the dozen. "Do you sell your dye with them?" Clara asked, stirring the gallery. Vane struck the table. "This board will not entertain accusations from a debtor's daughter. The baths are unsafe. Demolition begins Monday. The deed grants me its conduits and easements. I demand the plans for the main that passes beneath it. No such main exists. Then you will have no objection to my proving it." Vane looked toward the reporter's bench. His expression remained composed, but Clara saw calculation behind it. Public denial had trapped him in one direction. If he admitted the line, he admitted the inspection was false. If he continued denying it, any discovery became evidence. "Prove whatever fantasies you please," he said. "You have 4 days." Outside, an old man waited beneath the Corn Exchange arcade. He wore the faded blue coat of a municipal waterman and leaned on a hazel stick. "Samuel Dean," he said. "Last water reeve. Bellweather paid before Mr. Vane decided water could manage without one. Did you know Harriet Quill? My grandfather did. Called her the woman who made 12 buckets behave." Samuel explained that before the water board, 3 reeves had inspected Bellweather's channels. One chosen by the mills, one by the common fields, and one attached to the baths. They met at a measuring chamber twice each year. Samuel had entered it as an apprentice, but never through the bricked passage. There was a stair beneath the superintendent's office, he said. Bankmen filled it when they closed the baths. The chamber had a brass float and 4 sluice wheels. Miss Quill designed it. 7 turns for the mills, 3 for the fields, 1 for the baths, 1 for scouring the river channel. Not turns exactly. Shares. 7/12, 3/12, 1/12, 1/12. Samuel nodded. The mills always complained. Then the old reservoir company failed, and Vane's bank bought its bonds. After that, there were no more reeves. Clara showed him the bricked arch. He ran his fingers over the cement and pointed to a thin iron rod descending behind the copper pipe. Control linkage, he said. The wheels may still be below. They needed a mason to open the arch safely and shore the passage. No mason would come, but Jonas Pell, a 23-year-old millwright dismissed from Crowell's works for insubordination, arrived after sunset with 2 timber props on a handcart. I told Mr. Crowell his new turbine was drawing more water than the old race could return, he said. He told me figures were not a trade. Helping me may keep you from every mill in the valley. Then I shall have time to improve my figures. For 2 days the 4 of them worked. Edith carried rubble. Samuel identified each valve by touch. Jonas built a cradle beneath the cracked arch stones. Clara mapped every pipe and took pressure readings at dawn, noon, and the changing of mill shifts. The pressure fell sharply when Crowell's morning engines began, rose during the dinner bell, and fell again until dusk. The pattern proved a live connection to the industrial main. More telling was what did not change. The pipe leading west toward the common fields remained cold, but carried no vibration. It held water against a closed valve. Behind a second skin of brick, they uncovered an iron door embossed with a balance scale. Its lock had been packed with lead. Jonas drilled around it, and Samuel lifted the latch with the reverence of a sexton opening a crypt. The chamber beyond was circular and deep. 4 pipes radiated from a central bronze cylinder. A hollow copper float stood in a vertical tank, linked by geared arms to 4 curved gates. Mineral deposits covered the mechanism, but under 12 years of grime the ratios remained legible on an enameled plate. Mills 7. Commons 3. Baths 1. Scour 1. Below the words was the maker's mark. H. Quill, Civil Engineer, Bellweather, 1841. No title of land, no list of beneficiaries, no seal. It was proof of design, not proof of right. Clara turned the handwheel for the Commons branch by half an inch. The pipe answered with a deep knock. She stopped. It wants to move, Edith whispered. Samuel peered at the pressure gauge. It has wanted to move for 12 years. Above them, glass shattered. They climbed to find Borough Surveyor Bale and 6 laborers forcing the front door. Bale held the demolition order. Behind him stood Vane, Crowell, 2 constables, and half the town. Clara stepped onto the bathhouse stair, her dress gray with mortar and the brass ratio plate in her hands. You declared there was no machinery, she said. Vane's eyes fixed on the plate. Crowell recovered first. An obsolete regulator. It has no legal force. Then why brick it up? To prevent fools from interfering with the mills. The admission traveled through the crowd. Vane turned on him, but too late. Clara held the plate where everyone could see. The reservoir supplied 4 shares. The mills were entitled to 7. The common fields were entitled to 3. For 12 years, the bank has sent all 12 toward industry. A corroded label proves nothing, Vane said. Water is not inherited because a dead mechanic painted a number. Harriet Quill was the engineer. That drew laughter from several men, and Clara understood why Vane had never bothered to erase Quill's name. Disbelief had preserved what malice might otherwise have destroyed. Vane raised his voice. Bellweather employs 800 people because its mills receive reliable power. Miss Whitmore proposes to reopen an abandoned farm ditch on the authority of a plate she found in a ruin. If she touches that mechanism, every lost hour and every lost wage will be laid at her door. He motioned to bail. The laborers advanced. Then Edith Harrow walked through the crowd carrying her basket. She set the 3/12 stone at Clara's feet. "My father showed me that mark when I was 6, she said. So did his father. The fields fed this town before Mr. Vane learned to count interest. Other growers came forward. A widow from Long Acre, 2 brothers whose lease strips had gone to Thistle, an old seed merchant holding a ditch map. None could prove the compact, but each remembered its effect. Bale looked at the laborers. "We were ordered to remove a dangerous roof," he said uneasily. "Not machinery." Clara saw the distinction for what it was, a narrow place where fear had left room for conscience. "Shore the roof," she said. "Charge the expense to me." Vane laughed. "With what money?" "With the salvage you valued at £21. Jonas lifted a pry bar. Samuel stood beside him. After a moment, Bale ordered his men to unload the timbers. The demolition was postponed, but Vane's warning spread faster than Clara's discovery. By the following morning, the Bellweather Chronicle called her the woman who would starve the mills. Crowell reduced 2 shifts and told the dismissed workers it was prudent preparation for Clara's interference. Shopkeepers who had cheered at the baths refused her credit. Meanwhile, March ended without its usual rain. Edith cut open the soil in her highest seed bed. It was dry 4 inches down. Peas failed to break the crust. The shallow well produced 1 muddy bucket in an hour. "If we cannot water within 10 days, she said, there will be no spring planting. By June, Bellweather will buy every cabbage from Leeds at twice the price." Clara had a mechanism, a fraction, and an absent legal packet. She did not yet have the right to turn the wheel. She spent the next 4 days looking for one. The original packet was not in the county record room, but records rarely vanished alone. They left shadows in fees, copies, and arguments. Clara searched the quarter sessions order books and found that Harriet Quill had paid £2 6 to deposit an award with 3 plans. The clerk's cash book recorded the payment. A later volume listed a certified copy furnished in 1858 to Vane and County Bank during a dispute over reservoir bonds. The bank had the compact, Clara told Everett Shaw when she confronted him on the steps of the courthouse. "The entry says it purchased a copy. That does not establish present custody. Did you search?" "I act for the bank. You also witnessed my deed. You knew it conveyed conduits and appurtenances." Shaw's face tightened. "Those are standard words. Not in a deed prepared for a property your own report called disconnected." For the first time, his practiced sympathy deserted him. "Miss Whitmore, there are occasions when exact language prevents later inconvenience. Do not mistake caution for confession." He walked away, but his answer told Clara that the clause mattered. At the office of the Chronicle, she found another shadow. Newspaper reports from 1841 described the new public baths, and Miss Harriet Quill's ingenious engine for distributing the Harker waters in the proportions fixed by the enclosure award. A column from 1858 reported the bondholders' dispute. The bank had argued then that the mill share was secure precisely because the Quill engine physically guaranteed the other allocations. The editor, Lionel March, agreed to print both excerpts. He had mocked Clara 2 days earlier. Circulation mattered more to him than consistency. By evening, the town had learned that 7/12 was not a number Clara invented. Still, an old newspaper was not an operative covenant. Vane announced that Quill's arrangement had expired when the reservoir company dissolved. He produced water board minutes from the year the baths closed, declaring all surplus flow reassigned to industry for the preservation of employment. The resolution had passed 3 votes to 2. Vane chaired the meeting. Samuel read the notice posted outside the corn exchange and spat into the gutter. They called our water surplus because they shut our gate first. Clara returned to Chapel Row after dark. Bank workmen had emptied the house, but a sold placard had not yet appeared. Vane intended its possession to hurt her longer than a quick sale would. She stood at the rail and remembered her father at the parlor table, writing figures in ruled black books while she read pressure gauges aloud. He had known the public allocation was being taken. He must have kept more than the single notebook Vane submitted in the debt hearing. Everything removed from Chapel Row had gone to Vane's auction warehouse. Its inventory listed 12 boxes of waste paper at 6pence, yet the manager refused Clara's offer of $1 because Vane had withdrawn them from sale. She sent Shaw a written offer for twice their assessed value and gave his unexplained refusal to Lionel March. The Chronicle's next headline asked why the bank rejected a 200% profit on a dead surveyor's rubbish. By afternoon, Vane surrendered the boxes. The 12th held Robert Whitmore's pressure books. Each page carried 4 daily readings: Harker Outflow, Mill Branch, Common Branch, and Scour Branch. For 6 months before the baths closed, the sums balanced the reservoir discharge. On the day the Water Board reassigned the surplus, the common and bath readings became blank, while the mill figures rose by almost exactly 4 shares. In the final book, Robert had written, "Public gauges removed by order of A. Vane. Private verification taken at Eastern Maine. Commons allocation continues under award. Cannot be extinguished by board resolution. E. Shaw advises original award binding upon successors. Certified bank copy seen in deed vault, blue wrapper, number 44. Below it, on the last dated page, directed to renew Common Maine at board expense. Vane refuses written order after completion. Guarantee sheet presented with additional undertaking below signature. I will not pay twice, once in labor and again in silence." Clara read the lines until the ink blurred. Her father's anger had survived more clearly than his voice. So had Shaw's advice. She found the solicitor in Street Ann's churchyard after Sunday service. "You told my father the award-bound successors." Shaw looked at the copied page, then toward the families passing through the gate. "Advice given to a client is confidential." "Which client? My father or the bank?" He said nothing. Vane made him repair the Common Maine, then charged him personally. "The Maine is not dead. It is waiting behind a gate. You cannot know why the account was handled as it was. I know the guarantee was altered." Shaw's lips whitened. "Do not say that where anyone may hear." "Why? Because it is false? Or because you witnessed it?" He folded the copied page once, precisely, and returned it. "If you intend to proceed, petition for an injunction and an accounting in Chancery. Do not interfere with the mechanism yourself. The fields will be dead before a bill is answered. Then you must decide whether dead crops are worse than broken law." It was advice and a warning, the most he had courage to give. Clara filed a petition the next morning through a young solicitor in York, willing to act on deferred fees. She asked the county judge sitting in equity to restrain the bank from demolition, compel production of the certified award, and preserve all 4 water shares until title could be determined. Vane responded with 3 affidavits. Crowell swore that any diversion would halt his turbines. Bale swore that the quill mechanism was unsafe. Vane swore the bank possessed no water compact and had never concealed public rights. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks away. The sky remained empty. In the common fields, Edith planted 1 row of peas as a test. By the 3rd day, their pale shoots bent like threads. Families carried dishwater from cottages to save onion beds. The market price of potatoes rose before scarcity reached the stalls because merchants knew it was coming. Clara measured the reservoir head again. Even at the season's low level, Harker held sufficient pressure to deliver all 4 shares. Crowell's new turbine did not need 12. Jonas calculated its rated flow from the maker's plate and proved that 7/12 would operate it at 92% capacity if Crowell repaired 2 leaking races. The old mills together had once prospered on that allocation. Vane's claim was not that industry required all the water. It was that correcting 12 years of theft would require industry to stop wasting it. On the 10th dry morning, Edith found Clara in the measuring chamber. "I will not ask you to turn it," she said. "You came to ask exactly that." "No. I came to say what happens if you do not. My landlord can surrender my lease, and Mr. Crowell will buy the 3 acres. I can take a room with my sister, but I have 37 households depending on seedlings from my beds. The school buys my onions. The infirmary buys my beans. When the food comes by rail, the poorest will eat less." Clara looked at the 4 gates. The Commons wheel had been cleaned and oiled. She had tested its linkage without admitting water. Samuel had inspected the relief valves. Jonas had braced the old main. Every technical reason for delay had been answered. Only legal permission remained. Her father had refused to pay twice. Clara saw that obedience could also become a second payment. First, the right was stolen. Then the injured were required to wait politely until its value was gone. She wrote to Vane, the water board, borough surveyor bail, the constable, and the Chronicle. At noon the following day, she would restore the Commons branch to its marked 3/12 position, while leaving the mill branch at 7. She invited independent witnesses and demanded that the reservoir keeper record total discharge. Vane replied with a notice holding her personally liable for every consequence. At noon, 200 people gathered outside the baths. Mill workers stood on one side of the road, growers on the other. Crowell had told his men that Clara meant to close the works. Edith had told the farmers to bring their old ditch tools. Between them waited a line of constables. Inside the chamber, Clara showed Bale every brace and valve, while Jonas mounted pressure gauges, Samuel stood by the relief wheel, and Lionel March took notes. They confirmed enough available head for all 12 units. The mill gate stood at an illicit 12. The Commons, Bath, and Scour gates remained closed at their marked shares of 3, 1, and 1. The mechanism was not a set of 4 taps that could each demand its full number. Quill's float maintained a constant level in the central tank, while calibrated openings divided the available flow. To restore the common share, Clara first reduced the mill gate from its illicit 12-unit setting to 7. A roar passed through the iron, followed by a shudder that shook dust from the ceiling. Outside, someone screamed that the mills had stopped. They had not. The mill gauge settled at 7. Its needle held steady. Clara turned the Commons wheel. The gate resisted, then moved with a bronze groan. Water entered the western pipe for the first time in 12 years. Edith ran beside the old channel from the bathhouse to the fields. For 8 minutes, nothing appeared. Then muddy air coughed from a stone outlet. A brown trickle followed, carrying beetles, roots, and a child's lost marble. The trickle cleared. It broadened until water crossed the first measuring weir at precisely 3 parts to the mill branch's 7. The growers cheered. Several mill workers, hearing their own engines continue beyond the hill, began to laugh at Crowell's warning. Water entered Edith's upper ditch and climbed along the contour of the field. It did not run uphill there. The land merely deceived the eye. Beneath Bracken Hill, however, the sealed main truly rose, driven by the weight of Harker Reservoir above it. Clara explained the difference to the crowd with 2 glass tubes and a length of hose. Children understood before several board members did. For 3 days the arrangement held. The mills ran. The fields darkened. Edith's peas lifted their leaves. At the baths, Clara slept for the first time without dreaming of Chapel Row. On the 4th morning, the pressure collapsed. The first warning was the bell at Crowell's mill, ringing continuously instead of marking a shift. Jonas arrived breathless on a bicycle. All 3 turbines are stopped, he said. The mill gauge is below 4. In the measuring chamber, the central float lay nearly at the bottom of its tank. The inlet still read 12 units at Harker, according to the telegraphed report, but only 5 reached the divider. 7 units were escaping somewhere between. Crowell came with 40 workers. "She has done it," he shouted. "She has broken the main." Clara checked every visible joint. The Commons branch carried less than 1 unit. Nothing in her setting could account for the loss. Samuel descended to the lowest walkway and put his hand where the scour line vanished through the outer wall. "Scour," he said. The quill gate's indicator remained at closed, but the masonry beyond it thundered. An uncharted bypass had to join the scour line on the other side of the wall, drawing from the inlet before the divider. Someone had opened its second control outside the measuring chamber. The river gave them the proof. Below Bracken Hill, a buried outlet discharged a violent sheet of clear water into the old scouring channel. It tore reeds from the bank and raised the river by a foot. The secondary sluice lay behind a locked iron hatch on land owned by the Harker Reservoir Company, whose bonds belonged to Vane and County Bank. Vane arrived with the county constable before Clara could force the hatch. "Stand away," he ordered. "You were warned that interference could destroy pressure. That sluice was opened after I set the divider." "By whom?" "The hatch is locked. Your company holds the key. The reservoir keeper also holds one. So did the water reeves, once. You have admitted Mr. Dean to the works." Samuel struck his stick against the road. "I surrendered my key 12 years ago." Vane produced an emergency order bearing the judge's clerk's seal. On affidavits of danger to employment and public works, every control at Bellweather Baths was to be closed and sealed until the hearing. Clara objected that closing the divider would not stop the downstream scour gate. Vane ignored her. Under the constable's eye, chained all 4 wheels. Crowell's mechanic then entered the reservoir hatch with Vane. 15 minutes later, the scour stopped. The mill pressure rose to 12. To the crowd, it appeared that Vane had repaired what Clara broke. Crowell dismissed 180 workers for the week and posted their lost wages at the mill gate. The Chronicle printed "Experiment ends in industrial disaster." Clara confronted Lionel March with the 3 steady days and the water in the scour channel. He had printed both, along with Vane's claim that her adjustment dislodged an obsolete relief valve. "A relief valve cannot unlock a hatch." "Then give me evidence that someone opened it," March said. Not a conclusion. She had none. That was her error. She had mapped the 4 branches from Quill's chamber, but she had not traced every downstream control before restoring the common share. She had assumed a gate marked closed was sufficient because the pipe beyond it was quiet. Vane had used what she failed to inspect. In the fields, the 3-day watering had softened the surface, but had not reached the deeper roots. The court seal made any further opening contempt. Edith watched the last water drain from her ditch. "You did not cause the scour," she said. "I gave him the moment to use it. Then learn from the moment." Others were less forgiving. Mill families gathered at the Bathhouse and demanded Clara leave town. A stone broke the one unboarded window. Someone painted "thief" across the doors beneath "worthless palace." Clara did not defend herself. She walked the entire course of the scour branch instead. The buried pipe emerged at the river through a masonry culvert. Moss patterns showed that large discharges had occurred before, usually at night. At the hatch, she measured the lock and found scratches fresh enough to shine. She sketched the mechanism through a ventilation grill. The secondary gate used a rising stem with a 10-turn wheel. Sediment could not open it. A person had to stand inside and turn. Jonas examined the mill's shift log. The turbines lost speed at 6:18 inches the morning. The reservoir keeper's telegraph reported full inflow at 6:20. The river gauge rose at 6:31. Vane's emergency petition had been sworn before a magistrate in York at 5:40 the previous evening, more than 12 hours before the mills slowed. He declared an emergency before it happened, Jonas said. Then he planned it. Planning is not the same as opening. Samuel remembered that the hatch key was unusual. A hollow, barrel-warded key made by Dorridge and Sons. The reservoir company's key register should record each copy. Vane refused access. The court seal protected the valves, not the records. Clara's solicitor obtained a narrow order requiring preservation of the reservoir keeper's logs, key register, and telegraph slips. When a bailiff served it, the register was missing, and the keeper, Arthur Mebb, had left Bellweather to visit a sick relation. His cottage stood empty. In the grate lay burned scraps of paper. Clara would not trespass, but the bailiff could enter under the preservation order. Among the ashes he recovered a brass eyelet from a bound ledger and one unburned corner carrying the number 3 beside Vane's initials. Again, a shadow rather than the thing itself. The hearing was 3 weeks away. Vane had the award, the key register, and the keeper. He also had Clara's house. She had almost ceased to think of Chapel Row until a letter arrived from the bank offering to sell it back to her for £600 if she withdrew her petition and conveyed the baths to Crowell. The offer was open for 48 hours. Clara walked to the empty house after sunset. The apple tree her mother planted had begun to flower against the rear wall. Through the parlor window, she could see pale rectangles where their pictures had hung. £600 was impossible, but the price was not meant to be paid in money. Vane was asking whether the private memory of 2 dead people outweighed water for 37 living families. She tore the letter in half, then stopped. Her father had taught her never to destroy a measurement merely because she disliked the result. She smoothed the pieces and took them to Everett Shaw. "You drafted this. I draft many letters. It values the baths at £600 more than your exchange did. It values peace. It values the evidence beneath them." Shaw stood at his office window. On his desk lay a blue wrapping cord, the kind used around deed packets. Clara noticed a faint patch of blue paper fibers caught beneath the edge of a locked dispatch box. "Packet 44, she said. His hand moved toward the box before he controlled it. "You have it here. Leave my office." Vane swore the bank does not possess it. If he removes it now, he violates the preservation order. If you let him, you share his perjury. "Leave. My father wrote that you advised the award remained binding. He trusted you enough to record your name. Did you tell Vane to add the undertaking below his signature too?" Shaw turned. He looked older than he had in Chapel Row, not softened by remorse but thinned by years of avoiding it. "The guarantee was presented to me complete," he said. "That is not what I asked. I did not see it altered, but you saw it before and after." His silence answered. Clara left the torn offer on his desk. "At the hearing, Vane will say opening one pipe could destroy Bellweather's prosperity. When he does, every paper you hid will become part of that lie." The next morning, Everett Shaw disappeared from his office. Vane said Shaw had gone to Scotland, but on the 3rd day a packet arrived from the York Clerk of the Peace. Shaw had deposited the missing award, its 3 plans, and a sworn statement. He admitted hiding certified copy, number 44, after advising Vane in 1861 that its allocations bound all successors. He also confessed that Robert signed only a temporary repair guarantee. A clerk later added personal liability for the whole contract, and Shaw falsely witnessed the altered sheet. He requested immunity, not forgiveness. Clara welcomed the truth without mistaking it for absolution. Harriet Quill's colored plans and 13-page award were unmistakable. Harker Reservoir's flow was vested in 4 perpetual uses: 7 shares for the mills and their successors, 3 for the occupied common fields, 1 for the baths, and 1 for river scouring under 3 elected water reeves. No one reeve could open the scour sluice alone except during a flood certified by the borough surveyor. Ownership of the baths carried custody of the dividing engine and 1 reeve's vote. The common fields' rights survived sale or consolidation of individual strips. Any revenue from the bath share had to maintain the engine, gauges, and channels. At the bottom of the final plan, in Quill's neat hand, appeared a sentence Clara read aloud to Edith. The prosperity of manufacture and the nourishment of the town are not opposing claims when measurement prevents either from consuming the whole. The packet did more than confirm the water right. It made the bathhouse valuable. It was the legal center of a system Vane could not monopolize, while the building and its owner remained independent. The bank's case began to fracture. Yet Vane continued fighting because one document still favored him. Clara had opened the mechanism before judicial permission, and the mills had subsequently stopped. He could argue that the old allocation was impossible under modern demand, that the compact had become a danger, and that her act proved it. The missing keeper could prove sabotage. Lionel March traced Arthur Mebb through a lost carpet bag sent from York to Scarborough. A magistrate found him in a boarding house with £70 in new banknotes and a ticket to Rotterdam. Confronted with the register fragment and Jonas's timeline, Mebb confessed. Vane had brought key number 3 before dawn and ordered the downstream scour sluice opened at 6:15, while Mebb falsely reported full flow into Clara's divider. Vane would then arrive with the order he had obtained in advance, close the hidden sluice, and appear to save the mills. Crowell agreed to dismiss workers, so their anger would ruin Clara politically. Mebb surrendered the £70 and key number 3. Crowell denied everything. Then Clara's solicitor obtained the prospectus for his mill expansion, circulated privately to investors. It promised that Vane and County Bank had secured the exclusive industrial benefit of all 12 divisions of Harker Water, free from obsolete agricultural and bathing claims. Projected profit depended on the full 12 shares for pulping and dye washing. In a footnote, the prospectus cited the 1,841 Bellweather Water Compact. Vane had sworn that no such compact was in the bank's possession. He had sold investments by its exact name. 7 weeks after Clara left Chapel Row with 2 valises, the county courtroom filled before 9. Mill workers occupied the rear benches. Growers stood along the walls. On the council table lay Harriet Quill's award, Robert Whitmore's pressure books, the brass ratio plate, the key, the prospectus, and the torn offer to sell Clara's home. Vane took the witness stand in a black frock coat and swore that opening the Commons pipe would destroy the town's prosperity. It did destroy pressure, his barrister said. Did it not? Within 4 days, every major mill was stopped. And who restored service? I did. By closing the dangerous scouring outlet Miss Whitmore's interference had disturbed. Clara's barrister rose. How does one disturb a 10-turn sluice behind a locked iron hatch from a chamber 200 yards away? Vane said old mechanisms behaved unpredictably. The court heard from Dr. Nathaniel Price, a hydraulic engineer from Manchester appointed independently by the judge. He had inspected every branch under seal. The quill divider, he testified, remained accurate within 2%. The copper and iron mains were sound. The downstream scour sluice could not open through pressure, sediment, or vibration. Its wheel required a person to apply continuous force for at least 90 seconds. Price placed a tall glass vessel on the evidence table and connected it by rubber tubing to a shorter vessel on the floor. Water descended from the tall vessel, crossed beneath the table, and rose in a clear tube fixed above the judge's bench rail. The pipe after Bellweather Baths climbs Bracken Hill, he explained, but its crest remains well below Harker Reservoir. The greater elevation at the source supplies the pressure. The water rises uphill locally while descending overall. Nothing about Miss Whitmore's discovery defies gravity. It merely defies an incomplete view. The judge leaned forward. Would delivery of 3/12 to the common fields stop the mills? No. I ran the system at the award ratios for 36 hours under supervision. All existing turbines operated. Crowell's new turbine produced 91.8% of rated power. Repairing leakage in its tail race would recover most of the difference. What stopped them on the fourth day? 7/12 discharged uselessly through the separately opened scour sluice. Meb identified Vane and Key. Number 3. Shaw identified the award and his own 1,861 opinion. Lionel March authenticated the old reports. Edith placed the 3/12 boundary stone beside Quill's plan, where its dimensions matched the marked field monuments exactly. Then Clara testified. Vane's barrister asked why she opened the Commons gate before the court ruled. Because a right to water after the crop is dead is not the same right, she said. You placed industrial employment at risk. I measured the risk. The mills retained 7 shares, the amount that powered Bellweather for 70 years. Mr. Vane created the stoppage by wasting 7 more. You are not a qualified civil engineer. Neither was Harriet Quill, according to any institution that permitted her a certificate. Her engine divided the water correctly for 32 years, before I was born, and correctly when Dr. Price tested it last week. The barrister turned to Robert's notebook. Your father left you with a disputed debt. Is this proceeding not revenge? Clara looked at Vane. For weeks, she had imagined the satisfaction of seeing him stripped of his composure. Now he seemed less like the author of every loss than a man who believed numbers belonged to whoever locked the ledger. Revenge would return only what was mine, she said. The compact returns what belongs to everyone. In judgment, the court declared the 1,841 award binding. The Water Board's reassignment was void. The judge permanently restrained the bank and Crowell from interfering with the divider, reservoir records, channels, or election of water reeves. He ordered immediate restoration of 7, 3, 1, and 1 shares, with the bath and scour allocations held at their gates until their proper uses required them. The court canceled Robert Whitmore's guarantee as a fraud and charged the repair against the Water Board Reserve Fund, where it had belonged from the beginning. Vane and County Bank had to return Chapel Row with compensation for removed property and pay an accounting of 12 years' water taken from the common fields and baths. The prospectus and Meb's testimony were referred to the Crown solicitor. Vane resigned from the Bank and Water Board that afternoon. He later received 18 months' imprisonment for conspiracy to damage the waterworks and for perjury. Shaw lost his practice and served 6 months for the false attestation, reduced because he produced the award. Meb received a suspended sentence after repaying the money and testifying. Crowell avoided prison but paid a heavy civil judgment, refunded investors, and abandoned the second mill wing. No crowd cheered when the sentences were read. Too many families had depended on institutions those men corrupted. Public vindication did not restore a week's wages or 12 years of harvests by itself. The real work began after judgment. On the first lawful watering day, Clara did not turn the Commons wheel alone. Edith Harrow had been elected the field's water reeve by every occupied strip but one. The mills elected Jonas Pell after Crowell's own foreman withdrew. Clara served for the baths. Samuel Den stood behind them as honorary gagekeeper. Together they opened 3 shares. The water reached every old measuring stone that could still be found. Where warehouses blocked channels, the court ordered accounting paid for iron crossings and new culverts. Edith assigned the first full flow not to her own land, but to the highest communal seedbeds, where loss would affect the most growers. One farmer refused to join. Abel Rusk had purchased 2 dry strips cheaply and expected compensation greater than restored water. He called the compact an antique burden and appealed twice. He lost twice, but his skepticism forced the new Reeves to publish every weekly reading, repair invoice, and allocation. Clara came to value that consequence, even if she never valued his company. Crowell reopened all mill shifts within 9 days. Jonas showed his engineers where the tail race leaked beneath a retaining wall. Repairing it raised output beyond what the mill had achieved while wasting 12 shares. The work cost Crowell money, but the turbines ran more steadily. Some workers continued blaming Clara for the dismissed week. Others remembered who had planned it. Trust returned unevenly, which made it more durable than a sudden conversion would have been. Clara moved back to Chapel Row, but the house felt like a recovered exhibit until she unpacked her father's books. Edith and Jonas traced the scattered apple blossom china through auction records, and the neighbors returned it on Clara's birthday. One saucer was cracked. She kept it at the head of the table. Bellweather baths required more than sentimental repair. 2 roofs had failed. The boiler was useless. Marble was missing from the pools, and Portland cement had damaged the old stone. The award allowed 1/12 of Harker Water for public cleanliness, but required income from that share to maintain the whole measuring system. Clara needed a plan that could pay. She rejected proposals for a private hotel and for a grand spa beyond the means of mill families. Instead, she reopened the laundry first. 6 copper washing vats, fed by the bath share and heated with an efficient coal boiler, earned steady pennies from households and contracts from the infirmary. The wash house employed 8 women at posted wages. Its receipts paid Samuel's gauge salary and the first new slate roof. Next came 12 slipper baths, then a swimming basin shallow enough for children's lessons. Adults paid 2 pence, children a halfpenny, and anyone referred by the infirmary entered free. The old men's plunge pool became an indoor produce market every Tuesday and Friday until restoration funds reached it. Edith's beans, onions, and greens returned to Bellweather stalls that spring. Small at first, abundant the next year. Clara kept the measuring chamber visible. A locked gallery allowed school groups and ratepayers to watch the 4 gauges without touching the controls. Above them hung Harriet Quill's plan and a painted copy of her sentence about manufacture and nourishment. The original award remained in the county strongroom. No single bank, board chairman, or bath owner would ever again keep the only copy. Robert Whitmore's final notebook was displayed beside the false inspection report. Clara added no accusation to it. The daily readings said enough. 18 months after the hearing, the stone woman above the entrance received a new urn. Its water came from the children's basin, filtered and recirculated before returning to the river. On the restoration anniversary, Bellweather held no ceremony for Vane's defeat. Instead, the market gardeners brought the first spring lettuces, the mill band played in the courtyard, and the bath attendants opened the doors without charge. Abel Rusk came to inspect the accounts and stayed for a hot bath. He complained that the water was 2 degrees too cool. Near sunset, Clara descended to the measuring chamber. The float moved in its cylinder with a soft, patient rhythm. 7 parts passed toward the mills. 3 traveled west to the fields. The bath share rested until morning. The scour share remained closed, its key box requiring all 3 Reeves signatures. Jonas had installed a protected glass gauge along the gallery wall. In it, Harker water rose above the level of the buried pipe, a clear column showing the pressure that carried it up Bracken Hill. Visitors often watched for several minutes before understanding that nothing hidden was pulling it. The source simply stood higher than the obstacle. Edith came down carrying a basket of peas. "First picking," she said. "The infirmary has theirs. These are yours." Clara opened a pod. The peas inside were small, green, and perfectly formed. For years, Vane had described prosperity as a channel narrow enough to serve only the interests he controlled. Harriet Quill had built a different argument in bronze and copper. That shares could be measured, duties made visible, and water used without requiring one neighbor's survival to purchase another's ruin. Clara placed her hand against the pipe behind the opened arch. It was cold, pressurized, and no longer concealed. Beyond the wall, water descended from the moor, crossed the valley, and climbed the hill before dividing toward engines, fields, baths, and river. It had never flowed against nature. It had only been forced against justice, and now, in full view of the town, It rose exactly as it should,